Right now, I'm standing in the middle of my own kitchen, and it's warm. Rain is drumming on the roof, and not one drop is getting in. This whole place cost me $200. I built it out of a rusted trailer somebody left to rot at the edge of a field. This is a true story, my story. And it matters because 6 years ago, I was one bad month away from sleeping in my car for good. Before this is over, I'll show you the one discarded object, a 55-gallon steel drum most people haul straight to the scrapyard that kept me alive through a winter that dropped to 9 degrees. So let me take you back to when I had nothing, no land, no savings, no plan. And I promise you this, if I could start from where I started, you can start from wherever you are sitting right now. I still remember the smell of that first night I slept in my car. Cold vinyl, old coffee gone sour in the cup holder. My own breath fogging up the windshield until I couldn't see the streetlight anymore. Let me tell you how I ended up there, because it wasn't one big disaster. It was small. It was quiet. 6 years ago, I was renting a one-bedroom apartment on the wrong side of a town I'd lived in my whole life. I was doing everything right, or what I thought was right. I paid on time. I kept my head down. Then the letter came under my door. My rent was going from $675 a month to $950, just like that. $275 more dollars I did not have and could not make appear. I remember reading that letter 3 times, like the number might change if I stared hard enough. It didn't change. Nothing changes just because you're scared of it. I called around. Every other place in town was worse. The cheapest thing I found was $850, and they wanted first month, last month, and a deposit up front. That was over $2,500 to walk in the door. I had maybe $400 to my name and a part-time job that had just cut my hours. So I did the math over and over at that little kitchen table, and every time the answer was the same. I was going to lose my home, not because I was lazy, not because I did something wrong, just because the cost of a roof had quietly doubled while my paycheck stayed frozen in place. But here is the thing nobody tells you about hitting bottom. When you finally stop pretending you can win the game everyone else is playing, your eyes start working differently, because I couldn't afford a house. Therefore, I had to stop looking for a house and start looking at everything the world was throwing away. And people throw away almost everything. I want to be honest with you about how low it got first, because I hate videos that skip that part. For about 5 weeks, I lived out of my car in the back corner of a grocery store parking lot. I learned which stores leave their bathrooms unlocked at night. I learned to park under a light so I'd feel safer, then learned the light kept me awake, so I moved to the dark and didn't sleep either. I kept a gallon jug of water and a loaf of bread and a jar of peanut butter on the floor of the passenger seat. One morning, a woman I used to know from church walked right past my window in the parking lot. She saw me. I know she saw me. And she looked away and kept walking. Fast. Like being poor was something she might catch. That look stayed with me longer than the cold did. That look is a big part of why I'm talking to you right now. Because I decided in that parking lot that I was not going to spend the rest of my life waiting for a system to save me that had already decided I wasn't worth saving. If a roof was going to cost me $950 a month forever, then I was going to build a roof that cost me almost nothing and belonged to me. I just had no idea how. Not yet. The turning point came from a man I barely knew. He ran a small feed store on the county road, and I'd stop in to use the restroom and buy a single cup of coffee so I wasn't just loitering. One afternoon, he asked me straight out if I was living in my car, and I was too tired to lie. He didn't look away. He said his brother-in-law had an old cargo trailer sitting behind his property that had been there since before anyone could remember, full of mouse nests and rot, and if I hauled it off, it was mine for free. Free. That word landed in me like a coal. Now, I want you to understand what this trailer actually was, because if you picture something nice, you'll miss the whole point. It was a 16-foot enclosed cargo trailer, the kind contractors use to haul tools, except this one had been dead for at least 15 years. 2 of the tires were flat and cracked all the way through. The wood floor inside had gone soft and black in the corners. There was a hole in the roof, the size of a dinner plate, where water had been getting in for years. It smelled like wet cardboard and mice. When the feed store man's brother-in-law walked me out to see it, he actually laughed. He said, "You can't live in that, honey." He wasn't being cruel, he just couldn't see it. Most people can't. That's the whole secret. The thing that saves your life is usually the thing everyone else already gave up on. But I looked at that filthy metal box, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something other than fear. I saw walls. I saw a roof I owned. I saw a floor that was already up off the ground on a frame with wheels, which meant no foundation, no property taxes on a house, and no landlord who could ever hand me a letter again. So I said yes before he finished laughing. Getting it home was the first real problem, and I don't want to make it sound easy, because it wasn't. Those tires wouldn't hold air. A tow truck to move it would have eaten my entire $400 and then some. Therefore, I did the thing I would keep doing for the next year. I asked a guy at the tire shop if he had 2 used trailer tires nobody wanted, and he sold me 2 mismatched ones for $20 total because they were headed to the scrap pile anyway. A neighbor of the feed store man had a truck with a hitch and towed it to a piece of land for the price of a home-cooked meal, which I made on a borrowed hot plate. That trailer rolled onto a half-acre corner that belonged to the feed store man's family, land too small and too odd-shaped to farm, and he let me park it there for $50 a month. $50, down from $950. I want you to sit with that number, because that gap is the whole story. So now I had walls and a roof and a hole in that roof, letting the sky in, and winter was coming. The first thing everyone assumes is that you need money to make a broken shelter livable. I believe that too. I was wrong, and finding out how wrong was the most important lesson of my life. Because the biggest costs in a normal build, the land, the foundation, the frame, the outer shell, I already had for free. Everything left was small, and small is where salvage lives. That hole in the roof terrified me more than anything. Water is what kills a shelter, not cold, not wind. Water gets in, wood rots, mold grows, and you lose everything. I couldn't afford a new roof or a roofer, so I climbed up there with a wire brush and scrubbed the rust down to bare metal around the hole. Then I found my answer at a construction site dumpster 3 towns over. Contractors throw away the cut-off ends of things constantly. I pulled out a torn roll of self-adhesive rubber flashing tape and a half-used bucket of roof sealant somebody had left to dry out, except it hadn't dried out. It was fine. I patched that hole with a scrap of sheet metal, sealed the flashing tape over it in overlapping strips like fish scales, and painted the whole roof with the leftover sealant. Total cost, $0. That patch is still holding 6 years later. I checked it last spring, bone dry, but a dry roof over a soft floor is still a floor that's going to swallow your foot one day. Therefore, the floor came next, and the floor is where I learned about pallets. You have seen 1,000 wooden pallets in your life and never once thought about them. Every business throws them out. Grocery stores, hardware stores, garden centers. Most of them will let you take them for free just to save the hauling fee, but you have to know one thing, and this matters because it can make you sick if you don't. You look for a stamp on the side that says HT. That stands for heat treated. Those are safe. If it says MB, that means methyl bromide, a chemical fumigant, and you leave those alone. I pulled 40 heat-treated pallets over about 3 weeks, hauling 4 or 5 at a time in my car with the seats down. I pried them apart with a salvaged crowbar, pulled the nails, and I had a mountain of clean, dry, hardwood boards for absolutely nothing. I cut out the black, rotten sections of the trailer floor and laid new pallet wood decking over the good frame underneath. My hands were a wreck. I got 2 splinters so deep I had to dig them out with a sewing needle by flashlight, but I had a solid floor and it cost me a box of screws for $8. Now, right here is where I need to talk directly to you, because I know some of you are listening to this thinking, it sounds nice for me, but it could never be you. You think you have no money, no land, no tools, and no idea what you're doing. I want you to hear me clearly, because this next part is built for exactly you. You do not need any of those things to start. The very first thing I ever did, before the trailer, before any of it, cost me nothing but my pride. I started collecting. I got a free account on an online marketplace and set alerts for the words free and curb alert in my area, and I started a list in a notebook of everything people were giving away within 20 miles of me. In one single week, I found a free wood stove somebody was pulling out of a cabin, 3 rolls of leftover insulation, a working camp sink, and 2 windows a man had replaced and left leaning against his garage. I couldn't take all of it at once, but I learned the most important skill there is, and it costs nothing. You learn to see value where everyone else sees garbage. Start there, this week. Make the list. That list is the foundation, and it's free. Because here's what almost nobody understands about building from nothing. The materials are not the hard part. The materials are lying in dumpsters and along curbs in every town in this country. The hard part is believing you're allowed to want a home at all after the world has told you that you failed. You didn't fail. The price of everything went up, and your wages didn't, and you are not the only one, and you are not crazy for being scared. I was terrified the entire time. I just kept collecting anyway. So, with a dry roof and a solid floor, I ran straight into the real enemy, the cold. Everyone told me a metal box would be impossible to heat. And you know what? They were half right. A metal trailer with no insulation is basically a refrigerator you live inside. Metal pulls the heat right out of you. The first cold night I spent in there before I insulated anything, it was maybe 40 degrees outside, and it felt colder inside than out because that steel skin just radiated the cold at me from every direction. I woke up and my water bottle had a skin of ice on top. I lay there thinking maybe everyone was right about me. Maybe this was crazy. That was one of the 2 or 3 nights I almost quit. But quitting meant the parking lot, and I was never going back to that woman looking away from me. Therefore, I learned about insulation the way I learned about everything, by scrounging and reading late at night on my phone at the feed store where they had a signal. The trick with a small metal space is that you have to stop the cold from touching the metal and stop your warm air from touching it too. I found rigid foam insulation board the same way I found everything, in construction dumpsters, the pink and blue sheets they trim off and throw away. I collected enough scrap board over a month to line every wall and the ceiling. I cut it to fit between the metal ribs of the trailer and sealed the gaps with a couple cans of spray foam I bought new for about $6 each, the only new thing in the whole wall. Then, over the foam, I stapled up something that surprised me more than anything else in this build: reflective bubble insulation. It looks like bubble wrap with tinfoil on both sides. Here is the number that stopped me cold when I read it. That thin reflective layer can bounce back up to 97% of radiant heat. 97%. A material barely thicker than a magazine, reflecting almost all your body heat and stove heat back into the room instead of letting it bleed out through the steel. I got mine as a partial roll from that same marketplace for $15. Over all of that, I screwed my pallet wood boards for the interior walls, so inside it started to look like an actual little cabin instead of a tool trailer. And the difference was not small. It was the difference between life and death, honestly. But before I show you how I solved the heating problem that nearly ended everything, I want to pause here for just a second. Everything I did, every scrounge, every patch, every lesson learned the hard way in the cold, I wrote all of it down. The full system, step by step, is in my book, Built from Nothing, and it's available right now at shelterfromnothing.com. It covers the trailer build, the heating, the water, the insulation, and a lot of details I can't fit into a single video. If you're the kind of person who wants the complete map in your hands before the next cold season hits, the link is in the description, and it's $97 less than 2 months of the gap between my old rent and my new one. Now, back to the problem that nearly ended everything, because solving it is the thing I most want to hand to you. That same steel box that had felt like a freezer now held heat like a thermos. But insulation only keeps the heat you already have. I still had no way to make heat, and the temperature was dropping every week. That free wood stove I'd found on the marketplace turned out to be too big and too hungry for a space that small. It was built for a cabin 4 times my size. I tried it once, and it ran me out of my own home in 20 minutes, then went stone cold an hour after the fire died, and I could not afford to feed a hungry stove a full quart of wood all winter anyway. Firewood around here runs $250 a cord, and I'd have burned through that in weeks. So I was stuck. I had a warm shell and no honest way to heat it that I could afford to keep feeding. This was the problem that nearly ended everything, and solving it is the thing I most want to hand to you, because I have never heard anyone talk about it, and it changed my whole life. Here is what I found. And I need you to picture that 55-gallon steel drum I mentioned at the very beginning, the kind you see rusting behind every farm and factory in America, the kind scrap yards pay almost nothing for. That drum became the heart of my entire home, because I built what people who live off-grid call a rocket mass heater. And once I understood how it worked, I could not believe more people don't know about it. Let me explain it the way I wish someone had explained it to me, standing in the cold. A normal wood stove sends most of its heat straight up the chimney and out into the sky. You are literally paying to heat the outdoors. A rocket mass heater does the opposite. It burns a small amount of wood incredibly hot and incredibly clean in an insulated burn tunnel, so instead of thick smoke, you get an almost complete burn. Then, and this is the genius of it, the scorching hot exhaust does not go straight up the chimney. It gets routed sideways through a long channel packed inside a mass, a bench made of clay and salvaged brick, before it finally exits. All that heat gets soaked up and stored in the mass, and the mass slowly releases warmth for hours and hours after the fire is completely out. The numbers on these are almost hard to believe, and I only believe them because I live them. A rocket mass heater can burn up to 80 or 90% less wood than an ordinary stove to keep you just as warm. Instead of a full cord, I heated my entire first winter on scrap wood, fallen branches, broken pallet pieces, and the dead limbs I gathered off that half-acre for free. I fed it twigs and scraps you would use to start a normal fire, and it threw off heat like a furnace. And here is what I built it from, so you know I'm not making this up. The burn chamber and the heat riser I made from that free 55-gallon steel drum, and some salvaged fire brick I got from a demolished chimney for the cost of loading them myself, which was nothing. The long bench that stores the heat I built from a stack of that same free brick and a mix called cob, which is nothing but clay dug from the ground, sand, and straw, mixed with water by stomping it with my own bare feet on a tarp, clay from the earth, sand, straw, my own 2 feet. The single most important, life-saving part of my entire home was made from dirt and a barrel somebody wanted to throw away. My total cash cost for the heating system that carried me through a winter of 9-degree nights was about $30 for the stovepipe and the fittings. I remember the first night it truly worked. I fed a small handful of dry sticks into it around 8 in the evening, and I lay down on that clay bench with a blanket, and the warmth came up into my back from the mass underneath me like sunlight. I woke up at 3 in the morning, and the fire had been out for hours, and the bench was still warm, and my little home was still warm, and I cried. I'm not going to pretend I didn't. I cried because I finally understood that I had done it, that the woman who looked away from me in the parking lot was wrong, that the landlord was wrong, that the brother-in-law who laughed was wrong. I had taken a rotting metal box and a barrel and a pile of dirt, and I had built something warm and dry and mine for $200 total, and no one could ever raise the rent on it or take it away. Let me tell you where the rest of that $200 went, because I want you to see how little it really takes once you stop paying other people to own your life. Water, I hauled it first in free jugs, then set up a food-grade barrel to catch rain off that patched roof, and a simple filter kept it clean for washing. Light and phone charging came from a single small solar panel I found used for $35 and 1 recycled battery. My cooking runs off a little propane camp burner and a 1-pound bottle. My windows were free. My sink was free. My bed frame is pallet wood, and the mattress was a barely used one somebody put on the curb because they were moving. $200, spread across a year of patient scrounging, turned a piece of trash into a home I have now lived in, warm and safe and debt-free, for 6 years. And the fear that used to live in my chest, that letter under the door fear, that 1 bad month fear, it's gone. Not because nothing bad can happen anymore, but because I know now, all the way down in my bones, that I can build shelter from what the world throws away, and so I will never be truly at anyone's mercy again. That's the thing I most want you to walk away with. Not the drum, not the pallets, not the bubble foil, though I hope you use every bit of it. What I want you to keep is the knowing. The world told both of us that a home is something you rent your whole life from someone richer than you, and that if you can't afford it, you deserve the cold. That is a lie. A home is a dry roof, a warm floor, and heat you can make yourself. And every single piece of that is sitting in a dumpster or a field or a curb within 20 miles of where you are right now, waiting for someone with the eyes to see it. I was written off. And I'm standing in my warm kitchen in the rain, proof that they were wrong about me and that they are wrong about you too. So let me ask you something, and I really do want you to answer me. Of everything I built, which part surprised you the most? Was it the 97% from that thin sheet of reflective foil? Or was it that barrel and the dirt bench that held its heat all night? Tell me in the comments, and tell me where you're watching from, and tell me the one free thing you're going to go look for first this week. I read every single one, and there are people in those comments right now further down this road than me who will help you. If you're the kind of person who refuses to be quietly written off, who looks at what everyone else abandoned and sees a beginning, then you already belong here with us. Subscribe and stand with the rest of us who are rebuilding dignity and home from nothing, because the next story I'm telling is about a woman who turned an abandoned school bus into a house she raised 2 kids in, and you are not going to believe how she got water in the winter without a single frozen pipe. Stay with me. We're just getting warm. If you've watched this far, there's more I want to show you. Inside the shelter builders, I continue this build, picking up right where this video stopped. You can ask me your own question, and a real person, me, answers you myself. You're not alone. Folks like you are already inside. Just point your phone's camera at the code on your screen, and you can cancel anytime. No risk. Now, if this touched something in you, let me show you how I built a home on wheels for just $500 and gave a struggling mother a fresh start. That story's beginning right now.